In the dark and silent space, a small escape pod floated between the stars. It was spinning slowly like a lost piece of metal forgotten by the world. The inside of the pod was cold, and the lights were red and blinking weakly. The oxygen level was low and dropping fast. There was only one man inside. His name was Commander Eli Ward, and he was the only one left from the battle. His ship, the Horizon Blade, had been destroyed by enemy fire. The crew was gone, and the battle was over. The war had moved on, but he was still here, still breathing for now. His hands were shaking as he pressed buttons on the console, trying to send one last signal, one last call for help. He knew no one was coming. The battle had taken place in a dead zone, far from trade routes, far from human colonies. No one passed through here, not anymore. He looked at a small photo stuck to the inside wall of the pod. It showed his family smiling back at him, his wife, his daughter. Their faces gave him a little warmth, a little strength, but not enough to fight the cold that was creeping into his bones. Outside, the stars were distant and quiet, like they were watching him, like they were waiting for the end. But then something strange happened. A light appeared, a soft glow far away, moving closer. It was not a star, and it was not a rock. It was something else. Eli narrowed his eyes, trying to focus. His vision was blurry from the lack of air and the cold, but he could see it now. A ship, not human, not from the enemy. It was old and small and shaped like a shell. The light it gave off was soft and blue. He heard a soft beep, and then a voice, strange and quiet, came through his radio. It spoke in a language he did not know, but then it changed. The voice was soft but clear, speaking basic trade language. "We are not enemy, we see you, we come to help." Eli tried to answer, but his voice was weak. He pressed the signal key twice, which meant yes, please help me, and then he leaned back, closed his eyes, and waited, not sure if it was real or just his mind playing tricks. As it shut down, the alien ship moved closer, very carefully, as if afraid to scare him away. It opened a small dock and pulled the escape pod inside. The lights inside the alien ship were dim and calm. Everything moved slowly, like underwater. When the pod opened, the aliens were waiting. They were short, with thin arms and soft, glowing skin. Their eyes were large and gentle. They looked at Eli with quiet care. They spoke to each other in whispers. Then one of them stepped forward and touched his shoulder gently. He felt warm hands lifting him, pulling him out of the pod, carrying him through narrow halls that smelled of flowers and steam. They placed him on a soft table and covered him with a blanket. One of them placed a small breathing mask over his face. The air was warm and clean. Time passed slowly as the aliens worked. They checked his wounds, they gave him water. They spoke very little, but everything they did was careful and kind. They treated him not as a stranger, not as an enemy, but as someone who mattered, someone they wanted to save. Eli woke up fully hours later, maybe a day, maybe more. He did not know. He was weak, but breathing. He sat up slowly and looked around. The alien who had helped him first was sitting nearby, watching with soft eyes. The alien spoke softly, "You safe now? We find you, we bring you here." Eli looked at the alien for a long time, trying to understand why they would help him. He had nothing to offer them, no weapons, no trade, no power, but the alien just smiled and said simple words, "Life is life, help is help." Tears filled Eli's eyes, but he wiped them away. He reached out and shook the alien's hand. It was warm and small and shaking a little, maybe from fear or maybe from hope. He wanted to speak, but words failed him, so he simply nodded and held the alien's hand tight. That was how it happened. That was how one man from Earth, dying and forgotten in the dark, was saved by those no one expected. The Valari were not strong, not rich, not powerful, but they had hearts that knew mercy and hands that chose to help. No one else saw it, no camera, no news, no record, but Eli remembered, and in his heart, he made a promise. He would not forget, he would not let others forget, because kindness is rare in space, and when it comes it must be answered. He closed his eyes and slept, and the stars outside kept moving as the little ship flew away from the dead zone, carrying a man who should have died and the story of a rescue no one believed could happen. Commander Eli Ward opened his eyes slowly. The light was soft and golden, and the air was warm like sunlight through clouds. He was lying on a soft surface that felt like a bed made of air and leaves. The walls around him shimmered with soft patterns that moved like waves in water. He tried to sit up and his muscles ached, but he managed to rise. The room was quiet, except for the sound of something humming gently behind the walls. The walls themselves were not metal, but something smoother, something alive yet calm. Across the room a small figure stood watching with large glowing eyes. It was one of the aliens who had rescued him, the same one who had touched his shoulder in the pod. Its face showed no fear, no anger, just quiet patience. Eli placed his hand on his chest and breathed deep. The air was clean and thick with something sweet and light. The pain in his ribs was less now, and he could feel the strength slowly returning to his limbs. The alien walked forward slowly and held out a bowl filled with a warm blue liquid. It spoke in soft basic words again. "Drink this, it will help, not hurt." Eli reached out and took the bowl, his hands still shaking. He sipped the liquid and found it warm and smooth with a taste like mint and honey. He nodded in thanks, and the alien gave a slow bow. "My name is Talek," the alien said in careful words. "We are the Valari. This is our vessel, the Peace Ember. We are not warriors, we are travelers, we are healers. We saw your signal, and we came." Eli tried to speak, but his throat was dry. He pointed to his chest, and then to the stars, as if asking how long. Talek seemed to understand. "You were floating for many cycles. Your life was almost gone, but we found you just before your flame ended." Eli looked down and tried to process it all. These people, these gentle beings, had saved him with no reason, no promise, no reward. He was a soldier, a fighter. They were peaceful and small. They had no weapons, no armor, only kindness. Over the next few days, Eli began to heal slowly. The Valari cared for him with simple tools and quiet voices. They never left him alone, and they never asked anything from him. Talek stayed close most of the time, always ready to help, always listening when Eli tried to speak. Eli learned their ways little by little. The Valari lived by a rule so old no one remembered where it came from. All life has meaning, all pain must be eased, all help must be given without weight or chain. Their ship was small but full of warmth, every corner filled with soft lights and strange plants, every surface smooth and glowing with energy that seemed to come from inside the walls. They lived simply and moved slowly, like time was not something they feared. One day Talek brought Eli to a larger room filled with stars on every wall, like a giant window into space. In the center of the room was a tree glowing white with thin leaves like glass. "This is our core," Talek said softly. "It holds our memory, it sings to our past and listens to our future." Eli touched one of the branches and felt a warmth in his hand, like the tree knew him, somehow like it welcomed him, as part of something bigger than just himself. He felt small in that moment, but not alone. He turned to Talek and asked the question that had been building inside him since the rescue: Why did you help me? Why risk so much for someone you never knew?" Talek looked at him for a long moment, and then answered in a voice calm and deep, "The stars are cold, Commander, but we must not be. We saw a light fading, and we chose to bring it back, not for gain, not for trade, just because the light mattered." Eli felt his chest tighten with something he could not explain. It was not sadness, and not joy, but something deeper, something he had forgotten, while serving in the war, while fighting battles across the void. He stood in that glowing room and made a promise with no words and no ceremony. He placed his hand on the core of the tree and looked into the swirling stars. He would not forget this, he would not return to Earth, and let this act be lost in silence. Before he left, the Valari gave him a small stone carved with symbols. It pulsed gently in his palm like a heartbeat. Talek smiled and said, "This is our sign. It means life without end. Keep it and remember." Eli nodded and closed his fingers around the stone. He stepped into the small pod the Valari had prepared and looked back one last time at the ship that had given him hope. The Peace Ember floated like a firefly in the dark and then faded into the stars. He was going home, but he knew something had changed inside him, and no matter what the world said or did, he would carry the memory of the Valari and their mercy for as long as he lived. The journey back to Earth was long and quiet. Commander Eli Ward sat inside the small pod given to him by the Valari, watching the stars slip past the window like falling sparks. Each one reminded him of something he could not yet explain, something that pulled at his chest like a memory waiting to return. The pod flew with gentle speed, guided by the Valari's ancient navigation system. It hummed softly, a song made of light and math and silence. Eli listened to it each night as he floated between dreams and thought. Sometimes he closed his eyes and saw Talek's face, sometimes he saw the glowing tree, sometimes he saw fire. When he reached the edge of human space, the pod sent a beacon and Earth's patrols found him fast. They brought him in with surprise and questions. His name was still known back home. He had been listed as missing in action, lost during a fierce battle near the edge of the border war. His survival was unexpected, his story even more so. Eli told them everything. He told them about the battle, the crash, the escape pod, the endless silence in space, and finally about the Valari, the small gentle people who saved his life and asked for nothing in return. He described their ship, their kindness, their strange glowing core. The officers listened and nodded and wrote down words. They looked at each other and spoke in quiet tones behind mirrored glass. Then one of them, a man with sharp eyes and cold hands, said, "We thank you for your service, Commander. We will file this report under special events and forward it to Galactic Archives." Eli stared at the wall, wondering what those words meant in real terms, wondering if anyone would remember, if anyone would care. The man added gently, "We are at peace now, and there are many things to handle. Your story is noted, but the Valari are not a known power, and likely will not be contacted further. We have bigger concerns." Bigger concerns, Eli thought, and said nothing. He was taken to a recovery center, given clean clothes, hot food, and quiet rest. Doctors checked his body, military officers checked his mind. After some weeks, he was offered retirement with honors and a place in the Veterans District. He walked through the city feeling strange. Everything was loud and fast, buildings tall and sharp, voices everywhere, screens and signs and movement. He missed the soft lights of the peace ember. He missed the silence of the stars and the warm hands of the people who had saved him. He tried to speak of the Valari a few times. He told friends, fellow soldiers, officers, even a reporter once. He said, "There is a race out there who live in peace, not because they are weak, but because they choose to be. They saved me, and we owe them more than silence." But no one really listened. They smiled and nodded and changed the subject. Sometimes they said things like, "That is nice," or "Maybe one day we will find them again," but nothing changed, and time moved on like it always does. Years passed and the war stayed quiet. The enemies shifted, new threats came and went. Humanity grew stronger, louder, faster. Colonies spread further into space. New ships were built, new leaders rose, new maps were drawn. The name Valari was not among them. Commander Eli Ward, now older, now slower, still kept the small stone in his pocket. The one Talek had given him. It still pulsed gently against his hand. When he touched it, he often sat in the park near his home, staring at the stars and wondering where the peace ember was now. He would close his eyes and remember the words Talek had said. "The stars are cold, Commander, but we must not be," and Eli would whisper them back like a prayer, like a song. Only he remembered. One day he went to the Central Archive, hoping to search for any news of the Valari, any mention, any signal, any trace. The machines there were fast and deep. They could scan millions of records in moments, but the result was always the same: no match found, no updates, no sightings. It was like they had vanished, or maybe like they had never existed at all. Still, Eli did not forget. He wrote everything he could remember in a small journal, not for fame, not for proof, just so the memory would live somewhere, even if only on paper, even if only in his drawer. He told his daughter the story many times. She grew up hearing about the glowing ship, the soft tree, the people with light in their hands. She would ask, "Do you think they are still out there?" And he would smile and say, "I hope so." But deep down he felt something growing, something heavy, not sadness and not anger, just silence, a silence too big for words, a silence that came from knowing that kindness can be forgotten even when it should not be. The world kept turning, the stars kept moving, and the Valari stayed quiet. No signal, no message, no sign. Yet in the heart of one man the fire still burned and the promise still lived, because mercy had been given freely, and even if the universe did not remember, he would. The sky above Earth was quiet and clear. The stars blinked softly like old stories whispered across the dark, but something unseen moved beyond them, something that had been waiting, watching, hiding in the cold places where light could not reach. Eli Ward, now older with silver in his hair, sat on his balcony looking up at the stars like he did every night. His fingers gently turned the small stone in his palm, the one the Valari gave him. It pulsed softly, still alive, still warm. He thought of them always, but tonight something felt wrong. The air was too still, the stars too silent. Then the ground trembled, not much at first, just a soft roll like distant thunder, then stronger shaking glass, and waking lights across the city. Alarms wailed into the night, red flashes lit the sky, and people ran into the streets confused and afraid. Eli stood slowly, his heart pounding like a war drum. He looked up and saw fire streaking through the clouds, strange vessels shaped like blades falling from space. They did not belong to Earth, and they did not belong to any ally. They were dark, fast, and sharp like nightmares given form. Within minutes the city shields rose, blue domes of energy wrapped around buildings, but the ships moved with power and purpose. They struck with force not seen in years, weapons that bent light and melted steel tore through defenses like paper, towers crumbled and streets split open. The attackers were not here to speak, they were not here to trade. They had one purpose: to destroy, and they carried it out with perfect silence. Eli moved through smoke and screams, helping those he could, guiding people to safe paths. He knew these streets. He knew where the old bunkers were hidden beneath the surface, echoes of old wars now useful again. He carried a child on his back, her face wet with tears, her voice calling for her mother lost in the crowd. He placed her in the arms of a young soldier, who nodded with shaking hands, and ran with her down the tunnel below. The ground shook again, louder, sharper. A building nearby cracked and fell in slow motion. Eli stumbled and caught himself against the wall, his breath heavy, his knees weak, but his eyes still sharp, still searching. The enemy ships flew close now, their shapes clearer, not machines but something living, metal and bone fused together, red light in place of eyes. They moved as one, as if sharing a single mind, hungry and cold. He reached the command center now, half-ruined, half-burning. Officers barked orders into broken screens, maps blinked with red warnings. Eli stepped in, and they stared. Someone shouted, "Is that Commander Ward?" and another said, "We thought he was dead." Eli moved to the table, and pointed at the enemy fleet. "Those are not raiders, they are coordinated. This is not an invasion, it is a message. Something is behind this, something watching us, testing us." A general stepped forward with a deep scar on his cheek. "We have no name for them, we have seen traces before, systems going silent, colonies left in dust now. They are here, and we are not ready." The room fell into silence, only the hum of backup power filled the air. Then the general said, "We need allies, we need anything that can fight." Eli looked at the small stone in his hand, and for the first time in years it glowed bright. It pulsed faster, warmer, stronger. And then something happened. A sound deep and strange filled the air, not from speakers, not from alarms, but from the stone itself, a tone like wind through glass, like stars crying out across the dark. Eli closed his hand around it and whispered one word: Valari. Somewhere above the planet a small ripple broke, the stars shimmered and bent, and then a single ship appeared, floating like a leaf in the storm. It was not large, and not armed with heavy guns, but it glowed with light, pure and clear. The peace ember had returned. The enemy ships paused for the first time, their motion slowed like they sensed something strange, something wrong. Then the peace ember sang, a wave of light burst from its core, a soundless wave that touched everything like a breath, like a memory. Eli fell to his knees, tears in his eyes. The Valari had heard him, they had answered. After all these years, after all the silence, they had come not with weapons, but with something stronger. Across the sky the wave of light spread, and wherever it touched the enemy ships stopped, flickered, and then began to fall, their lights dimming, their flight failing, as if something inside them broke, something only the Valari could see and reach. The battle ended not with fire, not with death, but with peace forced into the hearts of war machines, and Eli knew this was no weapon, it was a message, life, without end, help, without cost, the creed of the Valari made real. As the smoke cleared and the people rose from the rubble, the peace ember hovered above, quiet and bright, a reminder that kindness is never wasted, and that one man remembered was enough to bring back hope. The sun rose slowly over a quiet earth, its golden light falling on broken buildings and silent streets. Smoke still floated in the air like forgotten prayers, but the war was over, the sky was clear. The enemy had vanished, not by fire, not by surrender, but by something older, something softer, something almost forgotten. Eli Ward stood near the edge of the city, looking out across the horizon, his body tired, his bones aching, but his heart full. He held the small stone in his hand, still warm, still glowing. The peace ember remained above like a star that had chosen to stay. Around him people moved slowly, picking up pieces, helping each other, no longer in fear, but in awe. They had seen what no human had ever seen before. A battle ended not by power, but by peace. The name Valari now passed from voice to voice, from screen to screen, not as myth, but as truth. The leaders of Earth gathered in quiet halls, voices hushed and eyes wide. They wanted answers. They wanted to understand who these beings were, how they did what they did, and why they had answered one man's call when no one else had. Eli stood before them not as a soldier, but as a witness. He told them everything again. He spoke of Talek, of the ship, of the glowing tree, and the promise made long ago, a promise that seemed small at the time, but now had saved a world. He said, they did not come for us, they came because they remember, and because I remembered. The council listened, some with doubt, some with wonder. One elder leaned forward, and said, how can we thank them, how can we speak their language? Eli held up the stone, and said, you do not need words, you only need to remember, you only need to carry their light as they carried ours. A decision was made not from fear but from hope. The Valari were not to be studied or captured, they were to be honored and welcomed. A signal was sent not from machines but from hearts. Every child, every school, every screen told the story of the Valari, of the rescue, of the silence, and of the return. Across the galaxy the name Valari began to rise, not in fear but in reverence. Ships painted their symbol on their hulls, a simple wave of light, a mark of peace. Soldiers carried the sign, not as a shield, but as a reminder that not all strength is force, and not all victories are loud. Eli spent his days in quiet service, guiding others, teaching the story, not just of what happened, but why it mattered. He wrote in simple words for all to read. He said, they saved me, not because I was special, but because I was lost, and no one should be left in the dark alone. He was invited back aboard the Peace Ember after many years older, now slower. He stepped onto the soft floor, and was met by Talek, whose eyes still glowed with that same gentle light. No words were needed, only a silent embrace full of memory and time. They walked together through the ship, the lights pulsing with warmth, the walls humming with soft energy. Talek brought Eli once again to the heart of the ship, where the glowing tree still stood taller, now brighter, its leaves reaching toward the stars. Talek spoke softly, the memory has grown, your world remembers, and so the tree grows. Eli placed his hand on the bark and closed his eyes. He saw visions not of war but of kindness, of people helping each other, of hands reaching across borders, across stars. He saw a child in a far colony holding the Valari symbol painted in color on a wall. He saw a doctor wearing it on her coat as she healed the sick. He saw a soldier placing it on a grave of a former enemy, now remembered with respect, not hate. Talek said, the light you carried has become many lights, and we are no longer alone. Eli opened his eyes, and smiled through tears, his journey from lost soldier to living memory now complete. Before he left, the Valari gave him another gift, not for him but for the people of Earth, a small crystal filled with light, a seed of memory. Talek said, plant this in your world, and it will grow not in soil, but in hearts. It will remember long after we are gone. Eli returned, and the crystal was placed in the center of a new hall, a place, not for leaders, not for war, but for peace, a place where people came to listen and to share, where the story of the Valari was told not once but always. And every year on the day of the attack, bells rang across Earth, not in mourning, but in thanks. Children looked to the stars and whispered the name of the people who came in silence, who saved a world with memory and mercy. Eli Ward, now just a name in a book, remained alive in the light that never faded, in the story passed from voice to voice, and in the hearts of those who learned that even the smallest kindness can echo across stars and time forever. The stars stretched wide and endless above the Earth, glowing like scattered memories across the black sea of night. Space had become quiet once more, but not forgotten, for something new had awakened in the hearts of humankind, not just wonder but remembrance, not just fear but purpose. In the great city of Lysara, where towers touched the clouds and the air shimmered with energy, the Hall of Memory stood tall and silent. Inside its crystal walls the light of the Valari gift pulsed, gently casting soft waves across polished floors. Children came every day, wide-eyed and quiet, listening to the story of the peace ember, the rescue, and the day of light. Among them stood a boy named Kale, no older than 10, with sharp eyes and a quiet mind. He watched more than he spoke, and dreamed more than he told. When others played with toys and tablets, he sat by the crystal listening to its pulse, counting the soft flashes, as if learning a language that no one else understood. Kale's parents worked in the archives, cataloging messages, signals, and fragments from distant stars. They often brought him old chips filled with static and sound, hoping to spark curiosity. One night, he found something strange, a file long buried, hidden under layers of forgotten code. Its name was a single word written in the Valari script, a word Kale did not know how to speak, but felt he already understood. He took the file to his mother, who smiled and said, "It is probably nothing, just old noise," but Kale insisted, and together they played it. The room filled with a sound soft and slow, like a whisper made of wind. It was not music and not speech, but something between, something that made the lights flicker and the crystal in the hall glow brighter than ever before. Word spread fast. Scientists and linguists gathered around the message. Some believed it was a greeting, some thought it a warning, others said it was only a memory repeating itself across time, but Kale believed it was meant for someone. He believed it was meant for Earth. The message was sent to Eli Ward, now resting in a quiet home near the edge of the sea, old in years, but still sharp in spirit. He listened and tears filled his eyes, for the sound was familiar, not just Valari, but something more. It was Talek's voice, not words but essence carried in light and rhythm. He asked for a private room, sat in silence, and closed his eyes. Placing the stone on the table before him, he let the message play again and again, until the sound shaped itself into meaning, not in language, but in feeling, not in thought, but in memory. And then he understood. The Valari were not just sending a signal, they were sharing a truth, of vision, a glimpse of something coming, something larger than the rescue, something deeper than peace. They were telling a story, not of war but of warning. A great change was near, not a threat but a choice. Eli called the council and spoke one last time, his voice old but firm. He said, "They are reaching out, not just to us, but to all who listen. The peace ember was never only a ship, it is a seed, and now it is growing across the stars. They are waking others, they are spreading the light, and soon many will come." The council asked, "What should we do?" And Eli said, "Remember and prepare, not with weapons, not with walls, but with open hands and open minds. The Valari will not be alone, and neither will we if we choose it." The message continued to play across the world, carried by ships and satellites, translated into song and image and light. Some feared what it meant, others embraced it. Temples and schools were built where people gathered to listen and to learn, not from the past but from what might come. Kale grew with the message in his heart. He studied the patterns and rhythms of the Valari. He learned their ways, not through books but through silence, through watching the stars and listening to the spaces between signals. By the time he turned 20, he was known as the listener, the youngest ever to be sent beyond the system to carry the memory into deeper space. He flew alone in a small craft powered by light, guided by the very signal that changed his life. He followed the whisper through nebula and dust, past stars unnamed and uncounted, until one day he found it, a place of quiet, a place of peace, a place glowing with soft fire. There stood not one ship but many, each different in shape and color, yet all sharing the same light, the same pulse, the same silence. As the peace ember, Kale stepped from his craft and was met by faces, not just Valari but others, beings of light and shadow, tall and small, all gathered in unity, drawn by one idea, the power of peace shared and remembered. Kale spoke no words but placed his hand on his heart, and then on the ground, and the beings around him did the same, for they understood the message was never meant to be decoded, only felt, only lived, only shared. And so the stars began to change, not with conquest, not with fear, but with memory, carried by those who dared to believe that one act of kindness can echo louder than 1,000 battles, and that peace, when remembered, becomes stronger than any war. Years had passed since the first light came, since the peace ember floated above a burning earth, since Eli Ward reached into the dark with nothing but hope and memory. Now the stars themselves held echoes of that moment, a moment that turned away war and chose something older, something stronger, something that would never fade. On the surface of a distant moon surrounded by silver mist and tall towers made of light stood the archive of dawn, not built by one species, but many, not held together by stone or steel, but by purpose and peace. Here the story of Earth and the Volari lived, not as myth, but as memory etched in beams of light carved into the wind, and passed from voice to voice without pride, without fear. Inside the grand chamber young beings sat in wide circles, their faces of every shape and color, their eyes bright with wonder. They listened to a figure in soft robes, old in body, but endless in spirit. It was Kale the listener, now a guide, now a keeper of memory. He spoke without words, through rhythm, through motion, through the shimmer of air around him, and they understood, for the story was now a song, and the song had no end. He told them of a man left behind on a world unknown, a soldier with no hope, who was lifted by strangers with no reason. He told them of ships that fell and cities that trembled, and how peace came not with fire but with light. He told them of the message that came years later, not as warning, not as command, but as invitation, and how the stars began to wake. Above the archive floated new vessels, not built for war, not shaped for fear, but crafted to carry the song further. Each one carried a crystal of light, a piece of the first memory, a seed that once glowed in Eli Ward's hand, now glowing in thousands, each one alive, each one waiting to find new soil. Back on Earth a monument stood in the valley of mist, surrounded by gardens and wind, tall and silent, shaped like the peace ember, with a single phrase written in every known language. They helped one, and we remembered forever. Here children came to learn, not just of history but of choice, and every year on the day of light a name was spoken, not in sorrow but in joy. Eli Ward, the one who remembered. Across the galaxy new worlds carried the legacy colonies, where walls were made of vines, not wires, where no one was left behind, where rescue was not rare but daily, where strangers were welcomed without fear, without price. These worlds became known as the Echo Worlds, places born from the memory of that single act, that single rescue. In deep space where light is rare and silence is deep, the Volari continued to guide, not with rule, not with control, but with presence and patience. Their ships moved like whispers across the dark, tending to places where sorrow had taken root, planting light where darkness lingered, always gentle, always silent, always remembered. Kale walked among them now, not as a child, not as a student, but as one of their own, his path shaped by memory, his steps guided by the pulse of the first message. He carried with him a final crystal, one not meant to be planted but returned, for it had been long enough, and the circle was ready to close. He returned to Earth, his ship falling through the sky like a comet of silver. He stepped out and walked alone to the place where it began, an old balcony overlooking a sea of stars, where Eli once sat holding a glowing stone. The house was empty now, but the silence was full. Kale placed the crystal on the stone table and whispered a name. The wind stirred, the trees shimmered, and above the sky opened, not with fire, not with thunder, but with a soft glow, and a single beam of light touched the crystal. It pulsed once, twice, then rose into the sky, joining the stars, where it would remain forever, a beacon of what was and what could be. He turned back and found children waiting, young voices asking, who was he, why did he return, what was the light? And he smiled gently and said, this is where it began, and now it begins again. For legacy is not a thing we leave behind, it is a thing we pass forward. And so the story of the rescue, the peace, the message, and the memory became more than a tale. It became a path walked by many, lit by kindness, shaped by courage, and carried not by heroes but by those who choose to remember. Because sometimes the greatest gift is not power or victory, but the choice to help just one, and the will to never forget.